The hip and knee, as well as the ankle, are the three joints involved in this motion. These include the knees and hip being slightly flexed, and the ankle staying static. The iliopsoas and rectus abdominis experience concentric contraction. These are located around the hip. At the knees, the hamstrings and the quadriceps experience their own forms of contraction, the hamstrings being concentric and the quadriceps being eccentric. The ankle. At the ankle, you will find the soleus and the gastrocnemius. The soleus experiences isometric contraction, while the gastrocnemius also meets isometric contraction. The iliopsoas crosses the hip and inserts into the lesser trochanter on the top of the femur. This means when it experiences concentric contraction, it pulls the femur closer to the abdominal muscles. The rectus abdominis has an origin on the crest of the pubis and an insertion in the xiphoid process and the 5th, 6th, and 7th rib cartilage. This means it does not necessarily pass over the hip. Instead, it tilts the pelvis posteriorly. These two muscles together cause hip flexion. At the knee, we find the hamstring muscles and the quadricep muscles. All of the hamstring muscles cross the hip and the knee. Because the hamstring muscles all insert into either the tibia or the fibula, this means it crosses the knee. So when concentric contraction occurs, the knee is pulled backwards, as they are all posterior muscles. They all also originate at the ischial tuberosity. This means they cross the hip as well. The quadriceps, however, act as stabilizers for the hamstring muscles. So when hip or knee flexion occurs, they will rather stabilize the muscle and experience eccentric contraction. This is because they are on the anterior side of the body. At the ankle, the gastrocnemius and the soleus both insert into the posterior surface of the calcaneus. These are the two muscles responsible for plantar flexion in the foot. In this image, we see the ankle, knee, and hip are still the major joints in this action. The ankle experiences light plantar flexion, while the knee and hip experiences flexion. The gastrocnemius and tibialis anterior are the muscles involved at the ankle, while the hamstring and quadriceps are the muscles involved at the knee. The sartorius and rectus abdominis are the muscles now involved at the hip. The gastrocnemius experiences concentric contraction, whereas the tibialis anterior experiences eccentric. The hamstrings and quadriceps experiences different contractions as well, with the hamstrings still experiencing concentric and the quadriceps experiencing eccentric. The sartorius and rectus abdominis experience the same type of contraction, and these would be concentric. The tibialis anterior now acts as a stabilizer for the gastrocnemius. As the ankle slowly moves out of plantar flexion, the tibialis anterior experiences eccentric contraction, but slowly moving into concentric, whilst the gastrocnemius moves from concentric into a slight eccentric. As the knee moves from flexion to extension, the hamstring also experiences a change from concentric into eccentric, with the quadriceps now changing from eccentric to concentric. This means the quadriceps are shortening in length. Because of the shortening in length, the tibia and fibula experience a pull that draws them anteriorly. The sartorius and rectus abdominis experience a strong concentric contraction. This helps us to drive power through the ball and allow us to actually kick the ball with more distance and height. The ankle, knee, and hip are still the major joints involved in this action. The ankle experiences plantar flexion, while the knee experiences extension and the hip experiences flexion. In the ankle, the gastrocnemius, tibialis anterior, both experience different forms of contraction, with the gastrocnemius experiencing concentric and the tibialis anterior experiencing eccentric. At the knee, the hamstrings and quadriceps also experience different contractions, with the hamstring now experiencing eccentric, while the quadriceps experiences concentric. At the hip, the sartorius and rectus abdominis both experience the same form of contraction, which is concentric. The gastrocnemius shortens in size, which causes it to become concentric, whereas the tibialis anterior stretches. This means that it lengthens and causes eccentric contraction. The hamstrings experience eccentric because of the fact that it is now lengthening out. Because a kick requires a follow-through, the knee will experience extension. This means the hamstrings will lengthen in size and experience eccentric contraction. The quadriceps itself will experience concentric contraction. This will mean that they will shorten in size, bringing the tibia and fibula in line with the femur. Because of the major flexion in the hip, the sartorius and rectus abdominis both experience concentric contraction. This means that they'll bring the femur closer to the abdominal muscles, and this allows for a swift and vivid follow-through. In this image, we see that the biggest amount of support comes from the foot that is placed firmly on the ground. There is only one point of contact with the ground, which means that the base of support is not as great, but the momentum carrying the player will allow him to maintain balance. With the help of his arms, this helps, as well as his center of gravity, which is always in line with his pelvis. Although this puts a large amount of stress on the leg that is in contact with the ground, the force is greater, but this can also lead to greater injury. Because the player is leaning over to one side, this causes concern, as this could lead to an injury in the leg. Points for injury include the knee and the ankle. The ankle especially because of the fact that the athlete is leaning to his left while he kicks. The ankle could actually feel a large amount of strain towards its lateral side. In this position, we notice that the biggest change is the center of gravity. As opposed to having the athlete leaning over his ankle, which could cause a big injury, he is now centered above his ankle itself. And instead of having him lean anteriorly or posteriorly, he is now directly above his ankle in that regard as well, which reduces the risk of injury. This means the force acted upon the leg is now spread over a larger base, as opposed to when he was leaning anteriorly, the support was directed mainly towards the front of the foot. This means there is a larger amount of friction and more stability, which means he has more control over his body. The athlete is still using his arms for stability, but this means that his center of gravity allows him to use less or worry less about using his arms in the situation. However, the momentum carrying him forward means that he will have to use his arms still to act as a balance. Because this is the downward phase, or the last downward swing of the kicking foot, this means there is a greater potential energy stored within the muscles itself, which means a greater force upon the ball. The base support of the body has stayed with the foot that is in contact with the ground. However, the center of gravity has shifted forward, which means that most of the force that is acted upon on the foot and the leg has actually moved to the anterior section of the foot. The explosiveness that was in the foot that was doing the kicking has been released into the ball, which means that the potential energy has been transferred. The leg now experiences a forward swing as the momentum carries it forward. If not stretched correctly, the muscles that are primarily around the hip will experience tightness. This could lead to impairment and the ability not to kick the ball correctly anymore. Landing after the kick as well could cause injury, as the participant will experience an upward motion with the body, and when come back into contact, if not landing correctly, could cause ankle injuries.